Hello everyone, welcome to Coadep Econs Academy. Today we are going to explore an interesting topic. We are going to find out why the demand curve slopes downwards, or we want to find out the factors that can explain the law of demand. It's going to be an insightful lesson, and I urge you to stay with me to the end of the lesson. This is our demand curve that has been given, DD. And the demand curve shows that when price is 15, quantity demanded is going to be 10. And when price is 5, quantity demanded is going to be 20. So what we see is that when price is high, quantity demanded is low. And when price is low, quantity demanded is high. This is an inverse relationship. Therefore, the law of demand states that there exists an inverse relationship between the price of a good and the quantity demanded of the good, all other things being equal. So what is important to this law is that we have to acknowledge that all other factors are remaining constant. Our duty will be to explore the other factors that are constant for us to be able to understand fully and appreciate why the law of demand holds. The other factors of interest are income of consumers. We have to acknowledge that that also affects demand. Price of related commodities, taste and preference of consumers, weather, number of buyers, advertising level. All these have influence on demand. But for the law of demand to work, for us to have an inverse relationship between price of the commodity and the quantity demanded of the commodity, all these factors and others that have influence on demand must remain constant. Now we move to answer today's question. What accounts for the law of demand? We are going to start with an illustration. We assume that the consumer of this commodity has an income of 100 cedis. We are assuming a monopoly market where we have only one buyer and the buyer has income of 100 cedis. The income doesn't change because we are working with the law of demand. So income here cannot change in our analysis. First of all, we start from a point where the price is 5 cedis. If the consumer is spending all the 100 cedis on the commodity, then we take the income and divide by price. That will give us the quantity of the commodities the consumer can purchase. So in this case, it is 20. From this point, let's introduce an important concept. Whenever we have some amount of income, the quantities of a given commodity that we can buy out of that income is termed as the purchasing power. So here the purchasing power is 20, and that tells us that at a price of 5 cedis with an income of 100 cedis, the consumer can purchase 20 units of the commodities. With this in mind, let's now observe what will happen should we have a change in price. Now price changes from 5 to 10, so price has increased. We want to observe what will happen to the purchasing power of the consumer. Remember, the purchasing power is the income divided by price. So now that price has increased to 10, what will be the purchasing power? We take the income, divide by price, and we are going to get 10. So the consumer's purchasing power on this commodity is 10. We are saying that by an increase in the price of the commodity, the consumer's purchasing power has changed. Actually, it has reduced. If we should do the reverse thinking, then whenever the price falls, the purchasing power will increase. This is one key concept that underpins the law of demand. And this is what we call the income effect. Alright, we've been able to establish the fact that whenever the price of a commodity changes, there will be changes in the purchasing power of the consumer, and we term this as income effect. So we have to understand that the law of demand holds because of income effect. This is not the only reason why the law of demand holds. There's another reason. Let's also try to understand that from an illustration. This time we're going to consider two related commodities X and Y, which are substitutes. Now, the price of commodity X is 5 cedis. Commodity X is what has been shown in this diagram, and we are saying that its price is 5 cedis. At a price of 5 cedis, quantity demanded of commodity X is 20. Now, what about the related commodity Y? We are assuming that the price of commodity Y is 10. We have to keep in mind that price of commodity Y is not going to change in our analysis, because talking about the law of demand, all other factors like the price of related commodity such as commodity Y is fixed. With this in mind, the next question is, what will happen when the price of X changes? Now, price of X has changed from 5 to 15, so there's an increase in price. What will be the quantity of X that we are going to demand? Is it going to increase? Is it going to decrease? Bearing in mind that there's a substitute which is commodity Y whose price is constant. For us to be able to understand this question, we need to understand a concept called relative prices. When we talk about the relative price of a commodity, it is just dividing the prices of the two commodities. So for instance, previously, the price of X is 5 and the price of Y is 10. So when we divide the price of X by the price of Y, we are going to get 0.5 as the relative price of X. So when we consider the price of X in relation to that of Y, we are seeing that the price of X is just half of the price of Y. This tells us that X is relatively cheaper. Now we need to push the analysis further. Currently we have price of commodity X as 15, while that of commodity Y still remains at 10. So what will be the new or the current relative price? We divide the price of X by the price of Y and we get 1.5. Look at the previous relative price, it was 0.5 and the current relative price is 1.5. The moment the relative price is higher than 1, it tells us that commodity X is relatively expensive than commodity Y. Whenever the relative price of a commodity increases, it is becoming relatively expensive. When it falls, it tells us that it is becoming relatively cheaper. And whenever there is a change in price, such changes in the relative prices occur inversely. So now that X is relatively expensive, the consumer will cut down its demand and move in for the substitute Y. This substitution occurs whenever there's changes in the relative price, and we term that as substitution effect. So the law of demand also holds because of this substitution effect. We are not yet done. We're going to consider one other reason why the law of demand holds. And here we're going to consider the concept of marginal utility. Marginal utility is the extra satisfaction we derive from consuming additional unit of a commodity. Now, what is important about this concept is that marginal utility is high when we consume less of a commodity. This is to say that when you have less of a commodity, any extra unit that you get yields you a higher satisfaction. On the other hand, when you have more of a commodity, then marginal utility is low. Because when you have so much of a commodity, the extra unit yields you less satisfaction. Look at the inverse relationship here. Marginal utility is high when we consume less, and marginal utility is low when we consume more. The consumer is deemed to be in equilibrium when the marginal utility of the last unit consumed is equal to the price of the commodity. We are saying that the consumer will always pay a price that is equal to the marginal utility. Now link this equilibrium condition of the consumer to the behavior of marginal utility and the quantities consumed. This concept also explains why the law of demand holds. We've been able to account for the law of demand from three important concepts. First, from the concept of income effect. Second, from the concept of substitution effect. And finally, from the concept of marginal utility and consumer equilibrium. So, income effect, that is the changes in the purchasing power of the consumer whenever we have changes in price of a commodity. Substitution effect, arising from changes in relative prices, that induces the consumer to substitute one commodity for the other. And marginal utility, where the consumer is in equilibrium because he pays based on satisfaction, and it is the tendency of the consumer to pay prices that are equal to the marginal utility. And whenever the consumer is consuming less, the marginal utility is high and he will be prepared to pay high. And whenever the consumer is consuming more, the marginal utility is low, he will therefore be willing to pay less for the commodity. Thank you for staying with me. Please help me to promote the channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing.